The brass handle of the hospice door rattled. The wood bowed inward under the weight of my mother hitting it from the hallway. "Open this door, Chloe. You are stressing him out." Her voice was shrill enough to cut through the heavy oak. I did not turn the deadbolt. I did not stand up. I sat in the vinyl visitor chair beside my dying brother and pressed my phone tighter to my ear. I was waiting for the fraud division at a regional bank to take me off hold. The cheerful jazz hold music piped through the speaker, mocking the sterile room. My brother Matteo lay on the bed with his eyes closed. His breathing was a shallow, unsteady rattle. He had maybe hours left to live. My mother pounded on the door again. She did not care about Matteo's stress. She cared that the locked door stood between her and a fraudulent wire transfer she was trying to push through. My name is Chloe Garcia. I am 41 years old. I work as a senior risk analyst in Minneapolis. I spend my days calculating the exact cost of human ruin. If you are listening to Revenge Order today, do me a small favor. Hit the like button and tell me your age and where you are listening from down in the comments. It helps to know who is sitting at the table with me. Especially if you have ever been the daughter expected to clean up the financial disasters your family creates. To understand how a sister barricades herself inside a palliative care ward against her own blood, you have to rewind 72 hours. You also have to understand what my brother taught me. When I was 12 years old, Matteo showed me how to play poker at our kitchen table. He would shuffle the deck with fast, fluid hands and wait for me to look at his face. "Watch their hands, Chloe." He told me that every time I lost a round. Not their mouths. The mouth lies. The hands do the math. I built an entire career on that advice. I look at spreadsheets and behavioral patterns, and I find the lie. When I walked into the St. Paul Hospice Center 3 days ago, I was already reading the room. The air smelled of industrial lavender and rubbing alcohol, a desperate attempt to cover the scent of decay. Matteo was asleep. His wife Sarah sat in the corner chair. She did not have red eyes. She was not holding a damp tissue or watching his chest rise and fall. She had a leather portfolio open on her lap. She was sorting through printed bank statements and highlighting account numbers with a bright yellow marker. Her fresh gel manicure caught the fluorescent light as her hands moved fast, sorting the paper into neat little stacks. She looked up when I dropped my tote bag on the floor. She gave me a tight, practiced smile. "Chloe, you made it." Her voice was the right temperature of sad, but her hands kept sorting the financial documents. She did not ask about my drive. She tapped her pen against a ledger. My risk analyst instincts flared cold in my chest. The man she claimed to love was slipping away a few feet from her chair, but her focus was entirely on the routing numbers. The math in the room was wrong. The first 3 days blurred into a single long shift. I sat in that vinyl visitor chair, listening to the rhythmic clicking of the oxygen concentrator. The hospice smelled of industrial lavender and rubbing alcohol, a desperate attempt to mask the underlying scent of decay. It is a smell you cannot wash out of your clothes no matter how hot the water runs. Sarah treated my presence like an inconvenience. She would leave the room for hours at a time, returning only to retrieve her phone charger or grab another stack of paperwork from her designer tote bag. She never sat on the edge of his mattress. She never smoothed his dark hair. When she spoke to the nurses, she used a clipped business tone, asking about timelines and expected outcomes, as if she were tracking a delayed shipping container instead of a human life. I stayed quiet and kept my eyes on Matteo. His skin was turning the color of old paper. I held his hand and tried to memorize the weight of his fingers. As a risk analyst, you learn to spot deviations from the baseline. Sarah was the ultimate deviation. A grieving wife should be focused on the bed. Sarah was focused on her ledger. The constant flipping of pages, the highlighting of numbers, the quiet, frantic energy she brought into the room every time she entered. It set my nerves on edge. The door to Matteo's room stayed open to let the nurses monitor the machines from the nursing station. From my chair, I had a clear view across the hallway into the opposite room. That was where I saw Evelyn. She was 82 years old, and she was dying entirely alone. No visitors came. No flowers sat on her windowsill. No family members stood in the hallway arguing about care plans. Just a sparse room with the blinds pulled tight against the Minnesota winter. On my second afternoon, I watched her try to lift a small plastic cup of water from her bedside table. Her hands shook so badly, the water spilled down her hospital gown before it reached her mouth. She did not call out for a nurse. She just closed her eyes and let her chin drop to her chest, absorbing the indignity in silence. I stood up. I walked to the family kitchen down the hall, poured a fresh cup of water, and grabbed a blueberry muffin from the volunteer cart. I walked into her room and set them on her tray. I guided the cup to her lips and held it steady while she drank. We did not exchange life stories. We traded quiet, polite smiles. I started bringing her a muffin every morning. It was a small routine, but in a place built for endings, small routines keep you sane. She never asked why I was there. She just watched the hallway with pale, tired eyes, taking in the movements of the doctors and the guests. On my third night, the rhythm of the ward shifted. It was past midnight. Sarah had gone back to her hotel to get what she called real sleep. I stepped out of Mateo's room to stretch my legs and get coffee from the machine near the elevators. My mother, Diana, was scheduled to fly in from Arizona the next morning, and I needed the caffeine to prepare my nerves. My mother and I did not have the kind of relationship that involved warm embraces. We had the kind of relationship that required armor. As I passed Evelyn's door, I saw she was awake. The single dim bulb over her bed cast long shadows across the linoleum. She lifted one frail finger and motioned for me to come closer. I stepped into her room thinking she needed water again. I leaned over her bed. Her hand shot out and grabbed my wrist. Her grip was shockingly tight. Her skin felt like dry leaves over wire, but the strength behind it was real. Her eyes darted past my shoulder toward the open door of Mateo's room. She looked back at me and whispered. Her voice was raspy, but the words were clear. "Whatever your mother asks you to sign tomorrow, do not do it. Drive home tonight if you can." I froze. I looked into her eyes, searching for the fog of delirium. Hospice patients often hallucinate on heavy pain management protocols. They see people who are not there or relive old conversations. I told myself it was the morphine talking. I patted her hand, told her to get some rest, and thanked her for looking out for me. I walked back to my chair, but the cold feeling in my chest did not go away. Evelyn had not spoken like a woman lost in a dream. She had spoken like a woman delivering a tactical warning. I sat in the dark and watched the snow fall outside the window, turning her words over and over in my mind. The sun came up gray and flat over St. Paul. At 8 a.m, the elevator doors chimed and my mother stepped onto the floor. Diana swept into the hospice lobby wearing a tailored wool coat and trailing a cloud of expensive floral perfume. It clashed with the lavender cleaning supplies, creating a sharp chemical smell. She bypassed me entirely. She walked straight to Sarah, who had just arrived with fresh coffee. They hugged. Diana patted Sarah's back and offered a heavy sigh tailored for the nursing staff passing by. Then Diana pulled back, and her face pinched in annoyance. She unbuttoned her coat and launched into a grievance. She did not ask how Mateo had made it through the night. She complained about the airport terminal. "Can you believe the inconvenience?" she said, her voice carrying down the hall. I tried to buy a coffee at the gate, and the vendor declined my platinum card. The clerk claimed it was frozen. I have had that account for 20 years. A ridiculous bank error. I will have to call them on Monday and threaten to pull my accounts. I stood near the doorway observing the exchange. I watched my mother wave a manicured hand in dismissal. Then I watched Sarah. Sarah did not offer a sympathetic nod. Her eyes widened for a fraction of a second. Her hand, the one holding her expensive latte, fluttered nervously and clamped down on the strap of her purse. She pulled the bag tighter against her ribs and forced a stiff laugh, agreeing it must be a computer glitch. The first alarm bell rang loud and clear in my head. A wealthy woman's credit card gets declined due to a sudden freeze. Her daughter-in-law, who has been sorting financial documents for 3 days, reacts with a micro-expression of panic instead of surprise. My analytical brain locked on to the data points. Sarah was hiding something, and Diana was oblivious to it. The math was adding up in a dark direction. Before I could process the implication, Diana turned to me. She walked over to the lobby chair where my winter coat was resting. She dropped her heavy leather purse directly on top of it, erasing my physical presence in the room with one casual gesture. She offered me a tight, mechanical smile. "Hello, Chloe. We have some business to take care of for your brother. Let us go to his room." She reached into her tote bag and pulled out a heavy wooden clipboard. Within 20 minutes of arriving, my mother managed to suck the remaining oxygen out of the palliative care ward. She marched down the hallway toward Mateo's room with the focused stride of a retail manager inspecting a flawed window display. Sarah followed close behind her, carrying the 2 coffees she had purchased downstairs. I trailed them, watching the stiff posture of my sister-in-law and the deliberate, commanding steps of my mother. We entered the room. The rhythmic hum of the oxygen concentrator provided the only baseline. Mateo had not moved. His chest rose and fell in shallow, unpredictable increments. Diana did not rush to his bedside. She did not brush the damp hair from his forehead or whisper comfort into his ear. Instead, she set her designer handbag on the single guest chair. Then she turned to face me, holding the heavy wooden clipboard she had pulled from her tote bag in the lobby. She held it with both hands, gripping the edges tight. The clipboard looked out of place in a modern digital medical facility. It was old oak with a rusted metal clasp at the top. It looked like something from a warehouse or a construction site. In our family, objects like that carried a specific weight. The clipboard represented the crushing burden of blind family loyalty. It was the physical embodiment of the demands my parents placed on me to fix whatever financial or logistical messes my brother created. Diana stepped forward and slid the clipboard across Mateo's rolling bedside table, pushing it until the metal edge bumped against my hip. "Chloe," she said, dabbing her perfectly dry eyes with a pristine white tissue. "Mateo's medical proxy forms need a secondary signature. The administration desk flagged his file this morning. It is just a formality so they can process his pain management updates. We need to get it back to the nurses' station right away." Her voice was smooth and practiced. It possessed the exact tone she used whenever she needed me to co-sign an apartment lease for Mateo in his 20s or bail out his early business ventures. It was a voice that offered no room for negotiation. I looked down at the clipboard. The top page featured the standard hospice letterhead. The text was dense legal boilerplate regarding palliative care directives and authorized representatives. Before I could reach for the paper, Sarah stepped out from behind my mother. She hovered at my elbow, invading my personal space. She reached into the pocket of her tailored blazer and produced a very specific, high-end blue fountain pen. It had a thick black resin barrel and shiny gold banding. She untapped it and thrust it toward my hand. "Use this," Sarah insisted. Her voice carried a sharp, breathless edge. "It scans better for the hospital records. The black ink fades in their copy machine." I did not take the pen. I am a risk analyst. My brain processes anomalies as threats. The statement Sarah just made contained a stark logical flaw. Modern hospital document scanners process standard black ballpoint ink with perfect clarity. A liquid blue fountain pen ink bleeds into paper fibers. It takes longer to dry. It smudges. You do not use a fountain pen for a quick hospital form unless you need the specific chemical signature of the wet ink to match something else. I looked at Sarah. I remembered the poker lesson Mateo taught me at our childhood kitchen table. I ignored her mouth and I watched her hands. Sarah's fingers were trembling. It was a subtle vibration, a tight, nervous energy radiating through her knuckles. Her thumbnail was picked raw, a red, irritated crescent on an otherwise immaculate hand. She pushed the blue pen closer to me, practically pressing the gold nib against my skin. I looked back down at the clipboard. I reached out and rested my fingertips against the edge of the document. The hospice letterhead felt authentic, but as I slid my thumb down the right margin, I felt the undeniable thickness of the paper. Standard proxy forms are a single sheet, or perhaps two, printed double-sided. This stack offered a heavy resistance against my touch. I traced my thumb to the top left corner beneath the rusted metal clasp. I felt the sharp bump of a heavy-duty staple. There were at least 3 pages stapled beneath the top hospice form. The bottom pages had been carefully folded back and tucked underneath, hiding the text from view. If I signed the signature line at the bottom of the visible page, the pressure of the fountain pen would bleed through or trace directly onto whatever document waited below. Or worse, my signature on this benign medical proxy would serve as a fresh, verified exemplar for a forgery. Evelyn's raspy voice echoed in my head. Whatever your mother asks you to sign tomorrow, do not do it. I looked at Diana. She stood with her arms crossed, waiting for my compliance. I looked at Sarah. Her eyes were wide, fixed entirely on the blue pen in her trembling hand. They were not grieving. They were executing a transaction. I will read it over coffee, I said. My voice was flat and devoid of emotion. I moved with deliberate speed. I slid the heavy wooden clipboard off the rolling table and dropped it straight into my deep leather tote bag. Before Sarah could react, I plucked the blue fountain pen from her shaking fingers and dropped it into the bag right beside the clipboard. Diana's face hardened instantly. The mask of the sorrowful mother shattered, revealing the rigid, demanding matriarch underneath. She took a step toward me, her jaw set in a tight line. "He is in pain, Chloe," she hissed. Her tone dropped an octave, losing the performative grief. "Do not be difficult today. We do not have time for your usual stubbornness. The doctors need those forms. Hand the clipboard back and sign the paper." She reached for the strap of my tote bag. I stepped back, putting the rolling tray table between us. I met her glare with a cold, steady stare. "If it is a standard medical proxy, I will sign it after I read every single clause," I replied. I read fast. "You will have it in 10 minutes. Sarah let out a short, panicked breath. "Diana Chloe is going to delay his medication. You have to make her sign it, now." Diana opened her mouth to escalate the confrontation, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. But before she could launch into another guilt trip, the heavy wooden door pushed open wider. A floor nurse stepped into the room, pushing a wheeled cart loaded with fresh saline bags and vital sign monitors. "Excuse me, ladies," the nurse said, her cheerful professional tone cutting through the toxic tension in the room. "I need to adjust his IV line and check his vitals. I am going to need everyone to clear the bedside for a few minutes." Diana closed her mouth. She smoothed the front of her wool coat and forced a tight smile for the nurse. "Of course," she said. "We were just leaving him to rest." Sarah looked at my tote bag with desperate, hungry eyes. She took a half step toward me, but the nurse maneuvered the rolling cart between us, creating a physical barrier. I did not wait for my mother to issue another command. I turned on my heel and walked out of the room. I marched down the long, quiet hallway, my leather boots clicking against the linoleum. The weight of the clipboard banged against my hip through the fabric of the bag. I reached the cafeteria at the end of the corridor. The room was empty, bathed in harsh, white fluorescent light. The smell of burnt coffee and old grease hung in the air. I walked to a corner table facing the wall, ensuring no one could stand behind me. I set my bag on the laminate surface. I reached inside and pulled out the heavy oak clipboard. I unhooked the rusted metal clasp. The papers slid free. I flipped the standard hospice proxy form over, revealing the hidden documents stapled underneath. I flattened the creased pages against the table and began to read. In the sterile light of the cafeteria, I pulled the pages apart. The thick metal staple bit into my thumb as I separated the hidden documents from the standard hospice letterhead. I flattened the creased sheets against the cool laminate table, running my hands over the paper to smooth the folds. The second document did not contain a single medical term. The header displayed the Stark Block logo of a regional commercial bank based out of Ohio. I read the title printed in bold black ink: Transfer of Guarantor and Assumption of Debt. My eyes tracked down the page, processing the dense legal jargon with the speed of a seasoned underwriter. I scanned the indemnity clauses and the default conditions. The borrower listed was Mateo's Logistics Corporation. The principal balance owed stood at $400,000. Below the financial summary, a blank signature line waited. Beneath that line, my full legal name was typed out in 12-point font: Chloe Marie Garcia. Mateo ran a Midwestern freight routing business. He started strong years ago, but he always expanded too fast, purchasing hauling trucks he could not afford to fill. I had audited his corporate ledgers 3 years prior and advised him to downsize his fleet immediately. He ignored my counsel, preferring the illusion of growth over the reality of margin. Now his business was drowning in red ink, and his wife was attempting to tie the sinking hull to my ankle. If I signed that paper, my personal assets would serve as collateral for a failing commercial enterprise. My pristine credit rating, built over 2 decades of meticulous financial discipline, would disintegrate the moment the Ohio bank called the loan due. Sarah was not asking for a familial favor. She was executing a calculated financial hijacking. As I traced the printed signature block with my index finger, my phone buzzed against the table. A sharp double vibration cut through the quiet room. I unlocked the screen. A bright red notification banner filled the display from my identity protection monitor. A hard credit inquiry had just been initiated using my Social Security number. I tapped the alert, opening the detailed report. My breath caught in my throat. A digital application for a home equity line of credit had been submitted to a national mortgage lender less than 2 minutes ago. The collateral property listed on the application was my primary residence in Minneapolis. I stared at the glowing screen. The house in Minneapolis was my sanctuary. I bought the property single-handedly. I spent 5 grueling years renovating the interior room by room, replacing the floors and painting the walls. It represented my independence and my ultimate security. The timing of the credit pull was far too precise to be a coincidence. The alert triggered at the exact moment I was supposed to be standing in the hospice room, pressing that blue fountain pen to the heavy wooden clipboard. My analytical mind processed the converging data points. I assumed my house was their primary target. They wanted to draw equity from my property to secure immediate liquid cash. The commercial debt transfer sitting on the table in front of me was a secondary snare designed to absorb whatever liquidity remained. They were attacking my financial foundation on 2 separate fronts. My breathing shallowed, but I forced my heart rate to slow down. Panic is a severe vulnerability in my profession. I locked my phone and slid the device into my pocket. I folded the bank documents matching the creases perfectly and placed them deep inside my leather tote bag. I left the cafeteria. The hallway stretched out long and quiet, illuminated by flickering overhead fluorescent bulbs. I needed to find Sarah. I navigated past the nurses' station and the surgical wing elevators. I spotted her standing alone near a row of vending machines tucked into a small, shadowy alcove. Diana was nowhere to be seen. Sarah looked entirely relaxed. She was tapping her manicured fingernail against the glass front of the snack machine, inspecting the rows of candy and chips. I approached her. I did not yell or wave my arms. I stopped 2 feet away, invading her personal, physical space. Sarah punched a sequence of plastic buttons on the keypad. A plastic bottle of diet soda dropped into the metal delivery tray with a loud clatter. I kept my voice low and even. Why is my legal name typed as the primary guarantor on Mateo's commercial debt? Sarah bent down to retrieve her cold drink. She straightened up and twisted the plastic cap. The carbonation hissed into the quiet alcove, a sharp sound against the low hum of the refrigeration unit. She took a slow, deliberate sip before making eye contact with me. We are family, Chloe. Mateo built that freight business from the ground up. It is a vital, tangible asset. We just need to bridge the cash flow gap until the probate courts open and distribute the estate. She spoke about my financial history as if it belonged to a public trust fund. You have an 810 credit score, Chloe. You carry a 0 debt-to-income ratio. You can hold the line for us. It is the least you can do while your brother is suffering. Sarah equated my decades of careful saving with shared community property. She believed my stability existed solely to buffer their reckless choices. She looked at me with an expression of mild annoyance, as if I were a bank teller refusing to cash a valid check. I looked at the diamond engagement ring resting on Sarah's left hand. The stone caught the harsh overhead light, throwing sharp prisms across the painted cinder block wall. I am not bridging your gap. I will never put my name on that document. You are attempting to shift nearly $500,000 of corporate liability onto my shoulders, while my brother takes his final breaths down the hall. Sarah did not flinch. She did not argue or attempt to deny the accusation. She took another measured sip of her diet soda. A cold, practiced smile spread across her face. It was an expression devoid of warmth or empathy. It was the look of a predator who believed the trap had already snapped shut, holding the prey tight. You might not have a choice, Chloe. She turned and walked down the hall toward the palliative care wing. Her designer heels clicked a steady, confident rhythm against the polished linoleum floor. She left me standing alone by the humming vending machine. The chilling certainty in her voice echoed in the quiet corridor. I watched her disappear around the corner, my hands clenching into fists at my sides. My mind raced through the permutations of corporate law and identity theft. If I refused to put pen to paper, how could they possibly force a binding signature? I marched back down the long corridor toward Mateo's room, my boots striking the linoleum with heavy, measured steps. I needed to corner Sarah and force her to explain her chilling threat. The sterile air felt thin in my lungs. But as I rounded the corner leading to the palliative care wing, my forward momentum hit a wall. The hallway was no longer quiet. A flurry of coordinated motion blocked my path. 3 orderlies in green scrubs moved swiftly in and out of the room directly across from my brother. A heavy metal gurney stood parked by the door. Evelyn had just passed away. I stopped near the nurse's station, pressing my back against the cool, painted cinder block wall to stay out of the way. I watched the orderlies adjust the crisp white sheet, pulling it high over the narrow frame resting on the mattress. The woman who had gripped my wrist with such desperate, shocking strength just 12 hours prior was gone. The quiet, polite smiles we traded over morning blueberry muffins ended in a flurry of clinical protocols and plastic body bags. The profound isolation of her death settled heavy in my chest. No family arrived to weep by the doorway. No children stood nearby to collect her modest belongings. She departed the world the exact same way she inhabited it during her final days, entirely alone. As the orderlies began to wheel the heavy metal bed out into the main corridor, a night nurse stepped out of Evelyn's room. She carried a small plastic bin holding a plastic water pitcher and a crumpled tissue box. She spotted me standing against the wall and altered her path. She walked over her rubber-soled shoes, squeaking faintly on the polished floor. She reached into the deep front pocket of her blue uniform scrubs. "Evelyn told me to give you this," the nurse said, keeping her voice low to respect the solemnity of the passing gurney. She pressed a small, folded square of paper into the palm of my hand. "She found it dropped in the hallway right outside your brother's room 2 nights ago. She said you would know what it meant. She was very insistent about it right up until the end." The nurse offered a brief, tired nod and hurried down the hall, trailing the orderlies toward the freight elevators. I stood alone near the empty doorway, holding the paper. It felt brittle and thin against my skin. I moved closer to an overhead light fixture, ensuring a clear view. I carefully unfolded the square, smoothing the deep creases with my thumb. It was a piece of yellow carbon copy paper, the type used to create duplicate records in bound ledger books. The top margin featured a printed logo for a mobile notary service based out of Minneapolis. The document was a standard notary transaction log receipt. My eyes scanned the handwritten ink entries filling the grid. A date stamp noted a transaction occurred 3 days prior, the exact day Sarah arrived at the hospice center. The service rendered was listed as identity verification and signature witness. The client name, written in block letters, was Sarah Garcia. The fee paid was $200 in cash. A cold, heavy weight settled into my stomach, replacing the ambient grief of the hallway. Sarah had not just printed blank commercial debt transfers from an internet template. She had already secured the services of a certified mobile notary. She brought an official legal witness into the hospice facility, long before she ever handed me a clipboard or a blue fountain pen. The snare was not theoretical. It was operational and fully armed. I kept reading the carbon copy, tracking my eyes down to the bottom right corner of the yellow paper. A small rectangular box indicated the location for the client's signature. Sarah's familiar looping script filled the space, but it was the printed text directly below the signature line that stopped the breath in my throat. It was the name of the designated notary public, the individual authorized by the state to verify the transaction. Evelyn Hayes. I stared at the two printed words. My vision blurred for a fraction of a second. I blinked hard, forcing the letters to snap back into sharp focus. The letters did not change. Evelyn Hayes, the frail old woman dying alone across the hall, was a licensed notary. The puzzle pieces scattered across the sterile floor of my mind rapidly snapping together, forming a horrifying, coherent picture. Evelyn was not a random stranger assigned to a convenient room. She was a deliberate, calculated casualty. I cast my memory back 5 years, visualizing a layout of my brother's early corporate office. Matteo ran his logistics business from a rented commercial space near the rail yard. The front room housed a large steel desk overflowing with shipping manifests and vendor invoices. Sitting behind that steel desk, managing the ledgers and the payroll accounts, was a sharp, efficient woman in her late 70s. A woman who kept the chaotic trucking operation running with meticulous precision until the day Sarah married Matteo and decided to streamline the administrative costs. Evelyn was Matteo's former business bookkeeper. Sarah fired Evelyn 3 years ago during a corporate restructuring phase. Sarah claimed the older woman struggled to adapt to new accounting software. But the reality was far more malicious. Sarah systematically drained the employee pension fund, shifting the capital into high-risk real estate investments that failed spectacularly. When Evelyn discovered the missing funds and threatened to blow the whistle, Sarah terminated her employment, stripped her of her remaining health care benefits, and blacklisted her within the local industry. Stripped of her savings and her income, Evelyn eventually fell ill. Sarah utilized her contacts in the medical administration field to dump the old woman into this specific state-funded hospice network, effectively hiding her away in plain sight where no one would question her rapid decline. Evelyn recognized me the moment I stepped onto the ward. She remembered my face from the framed family photograph sitting on Matteo's cluttered steel desk years ago. She knew exactly what Sarah was capable of orchestrating. I looked down at the yellow carbon copy again. The implications of the document hit me like a physical blow. The receipt proved Sarah already possessed a forged copy of my signature. She utilized a different, corrupt notary to validate the false commercial loan documents. The entire transaction was already sealed and legally binding on paper. Sarah did not need me to sign the commercial debt transfer hiding at the bottom of the wooden clipboard. She needed me to sign the benign medical proxy sitting on top of the stack. She needed me to press that specific, high-end blue fountain pen onto the paper. The unique chemical composition of the liquid blue ink would perfectly match the ink used on the forged loan documents. A wet signature matching the exact ink profile of the forgery would provide a bulletproof alibi if a forensic handwriting expert ever examined the original records in a federal courtroom. She was creating an undeniable chain of physical evidence tying me directly to the fraud. The receipt trembled in my hand. Evelyn spent her final days lying in a metal bed, watching the woman who ruined her life orchestrate the financial execution of my future. She used her last remaining ounce of strength to pass the evidence into my hands. My phone vibrated in my pocket, shattering the heavy silence of the hallway. I pulled the device out and checked the screen. An email notification popped up, indicating an urgent message marked with high priority. The sender was Sarah. I opened the message. The text was short and demanding. "Come back to the room, Chloe. Matteo is asking for you. Bring the clipboard. The doctors are waiting." Sarah was growing desperate. The timeline was compressing. The forged documents sat dormant and useless without the matching ink exemplar. I stared at the bright screen, processing the rapidly evolving threat. If I walked back into that room without a countermeasure, I would walk straight into a perfectly designed financial trap. I needed data. I needed to expose the depth of the rot before the trap sprang shut. I did not return to Mateo's room. I ignored the urgent email pulsing on my phone screen. I turned my back on the palliative care ward, walked straight to the elevators, and hit the down button. The metal doors slid shut, severing the smell of industrial lavender and the quiet hum of the life support machines. I walked out of the St. Paul Hospice facility and into the freezing Minnesota night. The air was sharp, biting at the exposed skin of my face and hands. I unlocked my SUV, threw the heavy leather tote bag into the passenger seat, and started the engine. I drove the grueling miles back to my house in Minneapolis. The highway was empty, a long ribbon of black asphalt cutting through banks of dirty, gray snow. I drove with the radio off, letting the silence settle the chaotic storm of adrenaline in my blood. I pulled into my driveway, killed the engine, and carried the tote bag into my home. The house was cold and quiet. I did not turn on the overhead lights. I walked into my home office, a room dedicated entirely to order and analysis. I dropped the bag onto the floor and pulled my secure work laptop from my briefcase. I did not brew coffee. I did not intend to sleep. I opened the computer screen and the harsh blue light illuminated the dark room. For the next 7 hours, I ceased being the grieving sister waiting for a tragedy to conclude. I became the senior risk analyst my corporate firm paid 6 figures a year to retain. I shifted into the cold, calculating mindset required to dismantle a complex financial fraud. I logged into my encrypted virtual private network and accessed the commercial databases my firm utilized for corporate intelligence gathering. These databases aggregate public records, civil litigation filings, tax liens, and corporate registry data, pulling threads of information hidden deep within the bureaucratic machinery of the state. I started with Mateo's Logistics Corporation. I ran the employer identification number through the federal tax registry. The results painted a bleak and devastating picture. Mateo's freight business was not just failing under the weight of poor management, the company was actively hemorrhaging capital at an unsustainable rate. 3 separate commercial vendors had filed active civil suits against the corporation within the last 60 days, demanding immediate payment for unpaid fuel and equipment leases. The State Department of Revenue had initiated preliminary proceedings to place a lien on the remaining commercial hauling trucks due to unpaid payroll taxes. The business was a hollow shell, a dead entity walking. But a failing business is a common tragedy. The data I uncovered next crossed the line from poor management into criminal enterprise. I utilized a specialized software tool designed to track corporate asset transfers and vendor payments. I pulled the digital ledger for the last 90 days. I sorted the expenditures, filtering out the standard operating costs, like diesel fuel and insurance premiums. I isolated the discretionary spending accounts. I stared at the screen, tracing the glowing lines of data. Sarah was not desperately trying to keep the logistics business afloat. She was systematically looting the remaining cash reserves. A clear pattern emerged. Large sums of money were being routed away from the primary business accounts and diverted into a newly registered limited liability company. I pulled the registration documents for the Shell LLC. The articles of incorporation listed a single managing director, Sarah Garcia. The business address matched a rented post office box in a strip mall 3 towns over. She was draining the legitimate corporate accounts, hiding the capital behind the impenetrable veil of a shell corporation. I dug deeper, analyzing the specific vendor payments authorized by Sarah in the last 30 days. One transaction jumped off the digital ledger, burning a bright neon warning sign into my brain. The ledger showed a direct wire transfer of $12,000. The recipient was not a trucking vendor or an insurance broker. The funds were wired directly to a luxury bridal boutique located in the Gold Coast neighborhood of Chicago. I sat back in my desk chair, the cold leather pressing against my spine. A luxury bridal boutique. I ran the address through a satellite imaging program verifying the storefront. It was an exclusive designer showroom specializing in custom couture gowns. Sarah was not sitting by my brother's bed mourning the imminent loss of her husband. She was actively engaged to another man while Matteo lay dying a few miles away. She was utilizing the stolen corporate funds to finance her upcoming wedding and secure a new life. She planned to shift the remaining liquid cash into offshore accounts, ensuring she walked away wealthy and unencumbered. And to complete her perfect escape, she intended to pin the massive remaining commercial debt entirely onto my pristine Social Security number. If the Ohio bank approved the transfer of guarantor documents waiting inside my tote bag, Sarah would vanish with the cash, and I would inherit $500,000 of liability. My focus shifted to my mother. Diana arrived at the hospice center acting like the commanding general of our family unit, barking orders and pushing clipboards. I needed to understand her role in the conspiracy. Was she a willing accomplice or an unwitting pawn manipulated by Sarah? I ran a secondary search focusing on Diana's personal financial records. The data revealed a complex web of deceit. Diana's name appeared as a minority shareholder on the registration documents for Sarah's new shell LLC. Sarah had clearly promised my mother a significant payout, a 30% cut of the saved assets diverted from Matteo's failing business. Diana believed she was securing her own retirement by helping her daughter-in-law protect the family wealth from government probate courts. But the data showed a different reality. I tracked the recent activity on Diana's primary credit accounts. The platinum card Diana complained about at the airport was not frozen due to a random bank error. The account was completely maxed out. Over the past 3 weeks, a series of high-dollar cash advances and luxury retail purchases had drained the available credit limit to zero. Sarah was not honoring the 30% agreement. She was actively bleeding her co-conspirator dry. She utilized my mother's authority to force my compliance, while simultaneously draining Diana's resources to fund her escape plan. Sarah intended to leave my mother holding an empty shell company and a pile of maxed-out credit cards. The digital clock in the corner of my laptop screen blinked. It was 4 a.m. Outside my office window, the sky remained pitch black, the winter sun hours away from rising. My phone pinged on the desk beside my keyboard. A new email notification lit up the screen. The sender was Sarah. I opened the message. "Chloe, come back to the hospice immediately. Matteo is asking for you. The doctors are waiting on the paperwork. Bring the clipboard. We need your signature now." The tone of the email shifted from polite family request to desperate demand. The timeline was compressing faster than I anticipated. The forged commercial loan documents sitting in the Ohio bank processing queue were entirely useless without the matching ink exemplar. Sarah needed me to sign the medical proxy using the specific blue fountain pen to complete the trap. She was losing patience. I closed my laptop and stood up. My muscles ached from the tension and the lack of sleep, but my mind operated with cold, crystal clarity. The emotional confusion of the previous 3 days evaporated, replaced by the sharp, calculating logic of a risk analyst preparing for war. Sarah believed she held all the cards. She believed she controlled the narrative, utilizing my mother as a blunt instrument to force my compliance. But she did not know I held the carbon copy receipt. She did not know I traced the $12,000 bridal boutique payment. She did not know her perfect trap was already dismantled on my digital desk. I walked to the kitchen and brewed a strong pot of black coffee. The sun would rise soon, and I needed to be fully alert when I walked back into that hospice lobby to face the architect of my financial ruin. I picked up the leather tote bag, feeling the heavy weight of the wooden clipboard resting inside. I had the data. Now I needed to execute the countermeasure. I packed my leather briefcase with meticulous care. Inside the central compartment sat 40 pages of printed forensic audits. The digital ledgers exposing the bridal boutique expenditures rested next to the offshore routing numbers I spent the night decrypting. Tucked into a secure side pocket was the yellow carbon copy Evelyn sacrificed her final energy to secure. The paper weighed almost nothing, but it contained enough legal liability to dismantle my family. I walked out of my house and drove back to St. Paul. The morning sun cast long, harsh shadows across the frozen banks of the Mississippi River. Highway traffic crawled over the icy asphalt, giving me time to regulate my breathing. A risk analyst does not enter a hostile negotiation with an elevated heart rate. You secure your emotional baseline. You let the opponent make the unforced errors. I pushed through the double-glass doors of the hospice center. The lobby was usually deserted at this early hour, save for a bored receptionist scrolling on a monitor. Today, a reception committee waited for my arrival. Diana and Sarah stood near a decorative indoor water feature, their postures rigid and expectant. They flanked a man I had never seen before. He wore an ill-fitting gray suit that bunched around his shoulders and a patterned polyester tie that clashed terribly with his wrinkled collar. A rectangular black ink stamp protruded from his breast pocket, marking his trade. He clutched a sleek leather folio against his chest. He looked around the pristine medical ward with the nervous, twitchy energy of a man who knew he did not belong in a palliative care unit. A faint sheen of sweat beaded on his upper lip, despite the drafty chill near the entrance doors. My mother spotted me the second I crossed the threshold. She marched forward, bridging the distance between the fountain and the entrance. She stepped directly into the center of the hallway, forming a physical barricade to prevent me from walking past. She wore the exact same tailored wool coat from yesterday. The dark circles under her eyes revealed a night spent awake, but her stance remained imposing. "Chloe," she demanded. Her voice echoed off the tiled walls, cutting through the soft ambient piano music playing from the ceiling speakers. "Sign the proxy today. The administration office is threatening to delay his morning pain management dosage. Do it right now so we can give your brother peace." She held out her hand, palm up and expectant. "Give me the blue pen and the clipboard. Let us end this." Growing up, Diana always utilized guilt as her primary instrument of control. She managed every family crisis by painting herself as the suffering martyr, demanding immediate financial or emotional compliance to restore the household equilibrium. I spent my entire 20s bending to that suffocating pressure. I fixed the bank overdrafts and signed the apartment guarantees whenever Mateo failed. My mother conditioned me to accept the burden as my inherent duty. But today the dynamic was permanently altered. I held the data. I knew the peace she promised was a financial execution designed to enrich a cheating spouse. I did not reach into my tote bag. I did not produce the heavy wooden clipboard or the blue fountain pen. I kept my hands resting at my sides, maintaining a relaxed, non-threatening posture. I bypassed my mother entirely, shifting my gaze to the nervous man in the gray suit. He blinked rapidly, surprised by the sudden, direct attention. "You must be the notary," I said. My voice was calm, carrying the cold, flat cadence I reserve for hostile corporate audits. The man swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing against his tight collar. He offered a brief, uncertain nod. "Mr. Gable," he replied, his voice thin and reedy. "Sarah hired me to verify the signatures on the medical directives for the patient." I took one deliberate step closer to him invading his personal space. I did not raise my voice. I spoke with surgical precision, letting the weight of the legal vocabulary do the heavy lifting. "Mr. Gable, are you aware of the penalties associated with notarizing a signature obtained under severe emotional duress? Are you familiar with the federal statutes regarding the backdating of commercial debt transfers across state lines? The penalty for participating in a wire fraud conspiracy and fraudulent inducement carries a mandatory minimum sentence of 5 years in a federal penitentiary." The color drained out of the notary's face, leaving his skin a pale, sickly gray. He looked at Sarah, then back to me, his eyes wide with sudden terror. He took a physical step backward, putting a foot of distance between himself and my sister-in-law. He pulled the leather folio tighter against his chest, a useless shield against the legal reality I just dropped onto the lobby floor. "I am just here for a medical form," he stammered, glancing nervously toward the exit doors. "Nobody mentioned commercial debt or federal statutes to me." Sarah stepped forward, trying to plug the leak in her carefully constructed plan. She let out a sharp, forced laugh that sounded like cracking glass. It lacked any trace of genuine humor. "Chloe, stop being dramatic," she said, shaking her head. "You are confusing the poor man. This is just standard hospital paperwork required by the state. Stop trying to make a scene while your brother is suffering down the hall." As Sarah spoke, she raised her left hand to tuck a stray strand of dark hair behind her ear. Her fingers lingered near her collarbone, intentionally displaying her diamond engagement ring. The princess-cut stone caught the bright lobby light, throwing sharp prisms across the wall. She wore the jewelry with profound arrogance. I stared at the diamond. I knew exactly which corporate routing number funded that stone. I knew the address of the Chicago bridal boutique where she planned to wear the matching designer dress. The ring was bought and paid for with the stolen capital from Matteo's ruined logistics firm. She stood yards away from her dying husband wearing the spoils of his destruction on her hand. I did not break eye contact with Sarah. I kept the blue fountain pen hidden deep inside my coat pocket. "I will sign the proxy in his room," I said softly. "I will sit by his bed, and I will read every single word of the document. You can wait out here." I stepped around my mother, brushing past her rigid shoulder, and walked down the long corridor toward the palliative care wing. My mind raced, analyzing the evolving variables. Sarah brought a live notary to the hospice at 8 in the morning. A forged commercial loan required verification, but it did not require this level of immediate, desperate physical presence. The commercial debt transfer was a snare designed to inflict pain. The credit pull on my house was a distraction designed to waste my time. But a grifter like Sarah also needed a payout. She needed a significant injection of liquid cash to fund her new life in Chicago. If she had an official state witness standing by in the lobby while my brother had mere hours left to breathe, she was targeting something far more lucrative than a debt transfer. She needed a fresh, verified signature before his heart stopped beating. The realization hit me as I reached the heavy wooden door of his room. There was a third asset hidden in the paperwork. The ticking clock was tied to something else entirely. I gripped the brass handle and pushed the door open to secure the room. I stepped into Matteo's room and pushed the heavy wooden door shut. The metal latch clicked into place. I reached down and turned the brass deadbolt, locking myself inside. The sudden silence enveloped me, isolating me from the frantic energy of the lobby. The air in the room was heavy, thick, with the sound of the oxygen concentrator working to keep my brother tethered to life. I walked over to the vinyl visitor chair and sat down facing the bed. Matteo looked fragile. The sharp angles of his face, the ones that used to intimidate rival logistics brokers during tough negotiations, were gone. His skin was pale and stretched thin over his cheekbones. His chest barely moved. He was drifting in the deep waters of end-stage organ failure, existing in a twilight state between heavy sedation and complete unconsciousness. I looked at him, and my analytical brain began to sort the raw data points I had collected over the past 72 hours. The forged commercial loan documents buried under the medical proxy on the heavy wooden clipboard, the sudden hard credit pull on my primary residence in Minneapolis, the yellow carbon copy receipt from the dead bookkeeper proving a mobile notary was paid 3 days ago, the desperate appearance of Mr. Gable in the lobby this morning. The timeline was compressing rapidly. Sarah was escalating her tactics, abandoning caution for speed. Why? Why did a grifter like Sarah bring a live, nervous notary to a hospice center at 8 in the morning? Forging a signature on a debt transfer was a passive attack designed to ruin my financial future slowly. Draining my mother's credit cards was petty theft utilized to cover daily operational expenses. Neither of those actions provided the massive, immediate liquid payout required to fund a new life and a new marriage in a luxury Chicago condominium. A parasite does not flee a dying host until it has extracted the absolute maximum amount of vital resources. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The commercial debt transfer and the home equity line of credit were nothing but elaborate smokescreens. They were tactical diversions. Sarah deployed them specifically to force my focus outward, to keep me busy defending my own personal assets while she executed the primary heist behind my back. She was targeting the one asset capable of generating instant seven-figure liquidity. Mateo carried a massive key man life insurance policy tied to his logistics corporation. It was a standard financial precaution for small business owners, designed to inject capital into a company if the primary founder died unexpectedly. But Mateo structured his specific policy years ago, before he ever met Sarah. He legally designated the payout to bypass the corporate structure entirely and flow directly into an irrevocable trust established for his two teenage children from his first marriage. The policy carried a death benefit of exactly $1 million. That was the true motive. Sarah did not just forge my signature on the commercial debt transfer. She forged Mateo's signature on a change of beneficiary form. She needed to alter the designated recipient on that $1 million policy, removing my nieces and nephews from the trust and inserting her own name, or the name of her new offshore shell LLC. But altering a high-value corporate insurance policy requires stringent verification protocols. A simple wet signature on a piece of paper is rarely sufficient for a $1 million payout. Insurance underwriters require the physical presence of a certified notary public to witness the signature of the policyholder in real time. If Sarah submitted a forged change of beneficiary document to the insurance broker, she needed a corrupt notary to backdate the verification stamp. But if the insurance company raised a red flag if an underwriter demanded secondary proof of life or a fresh signature due to Mateo's severe medical decline, Sarah needed a backup plan. She brought Mr. Gable to the hospice to secure a fresh, validated stamp while Mateo's heart was still technically beating. She intended to drag that terrified man into this room, prop my dying brother up against the pillows, and force him to press a pen to paper under the guise of signing a benign medical directive. But I had the blue pen in my pocket, and I had the door locked. The forgery was entirely dependent on digital transmission. To initiate a beneficiary change, Sarah would have to email a scanned PDF copy of the signed and notarized form directly to the corporate insurance broker. A physical copy, mailed through the postal service, would take days to process, far too slow for her accelerated timeline. I needed to intercept that digital transmission. I needed to prove the document was a fraudulent creation long before it reached the underwriter's desk. I unzipped my leather briefcase and pulled out my secure work laptop. I set it down on the rolling hospital tray table, adjusting the angle of the screen to avoid the harsh overhead glare. I booted up the machine and connected to my encrypted virtual private network. I utilized a specialized software tool designed for forensic digital analysis, a program capable of stripping the surface layers of an electronic file to reveal the hidden metadata underneath. Every digital document leaves a footprint. When a PDF is created or modified, the software embeds invisible information into the file structure. It records the exact date and time of creation, the specific software version utilized, and crucially, the unique IP address of the network where the file originated. If Sarah forged that document and scanned it into her computer, I could trace the digital origin point. I accessed Mateo's corporate email server, utilizing the administrative backdoor credentials I retained from my audit 3 years prior. I ran a targeted search query, filtering the outbox for any messages sent to the designated insurance brokerage firm within the last 72 hours. The search algorithm churned for 10 tense seconds. A single email result populated on the screen. The message was sent yesterday afternoon at 2:14 p.m. The subject line read, "Urgent, Beneficiary Update Policy 8849. Attached to the email was a single PDF document titled Signed Authorization. I downloaded the attachment to my secure local drive. I did not open the document to read the text. I ran the file through the metadata extraction tool. Lines of dense code scrolled across my screen, deciphering the hidden digital footprint. I isolated the origin IP address and ran the numerical sequence through a geolocation tracker. The physical location of the IP address did not ping from the St. Paul Hospice Center guest network. It did not originate from Mateo's corporate logistics office. The document was created, scanned, and transmitted from an IP address registered to a commercial retail space located in the Gold Coast neighborhood of Chicago, Illinois, the exact same address as the luxury bridal boutique where Sarah wired the $12,000. She forged the $1 million insurance document while shopping for a wedding dress for her next marriage. The sheer audacity of the crime was staggering. The digital proof was undeniable. Mateo was lying in a palliative care bed in Minnesota under heavy sedation. It was a physical and medical impossibility for him to sign and notarize a legal document in a bridal shop in Illinois at 2:14 in the afternoon. If I submitted this metadata extraction report directly to the Insurance Fraud Investigation Unit, the entire forgery would collapse instantly, triggering an automatic federal freeze on the policy payout. I reached into my bag to retrieve my phone to call the fraud department. Before I could dial the number, the brass handle on the heavy wooden door violently rattled. Someone grabbed the lever from the hallway and yanked it downward, attempting to force entry. The deadbolt held firm, groaning against the strain. "Open this door, Chloe." My mother's voice shrieked through the thick oak paneling stripped of all its previous performative polish. The heavy thud of a fist striking the wood echoed in the quiet room. Diana was pounding on the door with the flat of her hand, demanding access. "She is locking us out," Diana yelled, her voice vibrating with panic. "Get security! Get someone to open this door right now!" Another voice joined the assault, lower and far more dangerous. It was Sarah. "Chloe," she hissed the sound, slipping through the narrow crack under the door frame. "Open the damn door and give me the pen. You are interfering with his medical care. If you do not open this door, I will have you arrested for criminal trespass." Sarah realized her carefully constructed timeline was disintegrating. She realized I retained possession of the specific blue fountain pen required to match the ink chemistry of her forged documents. She stood in the hallway, separated from her $1 million payout by 2 inches of solid oak and a locked brass deadbolt. The quiet, psychological manipulation had failed. The physical confrontation was beginning. I sat in the vinyl chair, the digital proof glowing on my laptop screen, preparing to initiate the final sequence of my counterattack, while the pounding on the door grew louder. This brings us back to the exact moment the story began. The heavy wooden door shuddered under the relentless assault of my mother's fists. "Open this door, Chloe!" Diana screamed, her voice cracking under the strain of genuine panic. "You are stressing him out!" I did not move toward the lock. I remained seated in the vinyl visitor chair beside my dying brother, my laptop glowing on the rolling tray table. I picked up my cell phone and dialed the toll-free number printed on the header of the corporate life insurance policy. The automated routing system answered immediately. I navigated through the sterile voice prompts, bypassing the general customer service queue and selecting the specialized extension for the high-value fraud investigation unit. The line clicked, and a cheerful, upbeat jazz melody filled my ear. It was a bizarre, jarring soundtrack to a federal crime playing in stark contrast to the grim reality of the palliative care ward. Outside the door, the pounding stopped. I could hear the muffled, frantic exchange of voices seeping through the gap beneath the doorframe. The acoustics of the hallway amplified their conversation, carrying the words into the quiet room. "She has the pen," Diana hissed, her voice tight and breathless. "Why did you let her take the pen, Sarah? You told me this was handled. You told me the medical proxy was the last step." "Calm down," Sarah replied. Her tone remained steady, but a hard, desperate edge bled into her words. "It does not matter. The primary documents are already signed and verified. Mr. Gable is standing right there in the lobby. As soon as she opens that door, we push past her and get the final signature. We just need to keep her distracted." Diana let out a sharp, exasperated sigh. "Are you certain about the payout timeline? Because my credit accounts are entirely frozen, Sarah. I cannot even buy a cup of coffee. The bank said it was a security hold, but I need that 30% you promised me. I need cash today." Sarah laughed, a short, dismissive sound that conveyed profound arrogance. "You will get your cut, Diana. Just be patient. The moment Mateo passes, the insurance company releases the $1 million death benefit directly into the new corporate LLC account. I already initiated the paperwork yesterday. It is a completely automated system. We control the entire estate. I sat in the room listening to my sister-in-law confidently detail her successful heist, unaware that the very foundation of her plan was disintegrating on a digital screen 3 feet away from my brother's bed. The dramatic irony hung heavy in the sterile air. She stood in the hallway bragging about a $1 million payout, while I actively held the phone to my ear, waiting to execute the kill switch. The hold music abruptly stopped. A live agent came on the line. "Thank you for calling the Corporate Fraud Investigation Unit. My name is Agent Miller. How can I assist you today?" His voice was professional and deeply serious, carrying the weight of institutional authority. I did not waste time with pleasantries or emotional exposition. I delivered the raw data with the cold precision of a risk analyst filing an urgent incident report. "Agent Miller, my name is Chloe Garcia. I am calling to report an active federal wire fraud and identity theft incident currently in progress. The target is a key man corporate life insurance policy. I recited the 9-digit alphanumeric policy number, reading it directly from the screen of my laptop. I heard the rapid clatter of a mechanical keyboard through the receiver as Agent Miller accessed the file. "I have the policy pulled up, Ms. Garcia. This is a high-value commercial asset. The listed insured is Mateo Garcia." "That is correct," I replied, keeping my voice low to prevent the sound from carrying through the door. "I am the biological sister of the insured. A fraudulent change of beneficiary form was submitted to your brokerage office yesterday afternoon via email. The document attempts to divert the $1 million death benefit away from the established irrevocable trust and into a newly formed limited liability company." The keyboard clicking paused. Ms. Garcia altering a beneficiary designation on a policy of this magnitude requires verified, notarized signatures. Our system indicates a digitally signed authorization was received and placed into the processing queue. Are you stating the signature as a forgery? "It is a forgery," I stated flatly. "The patient is currently lying in a palliative care bed in a St. Paul Hospice facility. He is suffering from end-stage organ failure and is entirely comatose. He lacks the physical capacity to hold a pen, let alone execute a complex legal document." I leaned forward, reading the forensic data off my laptop screen. "I am preparing to transmit a secure digital package to your department. It contains the extracted metadata from the PDF file submitted to your office yesterday. The EXIF data proves the document was not scanned or created at the hospice facility. The IP address originates from a commercial retail boutique located in the Gold Coast neighborhood of Chicago, Illinois. The document was forged by the patient's wife, Sarah Garcia. She is currently attempting to secure a secondary fraudulent signature utilizing a corrupt mobile notary standing by in the facility lobby." A heavy silence settled over the phone line. The casual customer service demeanor vanished entirely, replaced by the sharp, focused intensity of a federal investigator evaluating a credible threat. The rapid clicking of the keyboard resumed, echoing with urgent staccato bursts. "Ms. Garcia," Agent Miller said, his tone dropping an octave, "the evidence you are describing constitutes a severe violation of federal statutes. We take allegations of beneficiary fraud extremely seriously, especially involving high-value corporate assets." He paused, taking a breath. "I am overriding the automated processing queue immediately. I am placing a hard freeze on policy 8849. No funds will be disbursed under any circumstances until a full physical investigation is concluded. The digital file you described will be forwarded to the FBI Wire Fraud Division for immediate review. Do you have physical possession of any original documents related to this incident?" "I have a yellow carbon copy receipt from the mobile notary service, proving a transaction occurred 3 days ago," I replied. "I also have possession of the forged commercial debt transfer documents they attempted to use as a secondary diversion." "Secure those documents," Agent Miller ordered. "Do not hand them over to anyone. A field investigator will contact you within the hour to arrange a secure transfer of the digital metadata and the physical evidence. Ensure your own safety, Ms. Garcia. These situations can become highly volatile when the perpetrators realize the funds are locked. I understand, I said. The money is locked. That is all I needed. I terminated the call. I set the phone down on the rolling tray table next to my laptop. I looked at Mateo. His breathing remained shallow, a fragile rhythm against the quiet hum of the machines. He was safe. The legacy he built for his children was secured, trapped behind an impenetrable wall of federal bureaucracy. The insurance company would not release a single dime to Sarah or her offshore shell company. The financial war was won. The tactical maneuvering was complete. But the interpersonal conflict, the toxic rot infecting my family, still required a final surgical extraction. Outside the door, the pounding resumed. Sarah stepped up to the wood, striking it with the heavy heel of her hand. "Chloe," she yelled, her voice shrill and commanding. "Open the door, right now. I am calling the facility administrator. I am having you physically removed from the premises." I closed my laptop, saving the encrypted forensic files. I slipped the computer back into my leather briefcase and zipped the compartment shut. I stood up from the vinyl visitor chair. I smoothed the wrinkles from my wool slacks and adjusted the cuffs of my blazer. I took a deep breath, centering my emotional baseline. I walked across the room, my boots silent on the linoleum floor. I reached out and gripped the cold brass handle of the deadbolt. I turned the lock with a loud, sharp click and pulled the heavy wooden door open. I turned the brass deadbolt with a sharp, metallic click. I pulled the heavy oak door inward, opening the room to the harsh fluorescent light of the hallway. Diana and Sarah did not wait for an invitation. They surged forward, using their physical momentum to push their way across the threshold. My mother stepped in first, her face tight with righteous indignation. Sarah flanked her, moving with a sharp, aggressive energy. The mask of the sorrowful, exhausted wife was gone, entirely replaced by a feral, predatory intensity. Her dark eyes swept the room, locking onto the leather briefcase resting on the rolling tray table. "What did you do?" Sarah hissed. Her voice dropped to a venomous whisper, designed to carry maximum threat without attracting the attention of the nursing staff down the hall. "Why did you lock the door? Where is the clipboard, Chloe? Give me the blue pen right now." She took a step toward me, raising her right hand. The diamond engagement ring flashed under the overhead bulbs, a jagged point of brilliant light. I did not retreat. I stood my ground near the foot of my brother's bed, placing myself between the two women and the comatose man they were attempting to rob. I maintained a relaxed posture, but I kept my hands loose and ready at my sides. "I just stopped you from paying for your new fiancé's Chicago condo with my brother's life insurance," I stated. My voice was calm, flat, and devoid of any emotional inflection. I delivered the sentence with the exact same clinical precision I used to deliver a failed audit report to a corporate board of directors. The words landed in the quiet room like a physical shockwave. Sarah froze mid-stride. The aggressive forward momentum died instantly. A flicker of genuine panic crossed her face, pulling the blood from her cheeks. She opened her mouth to speak, to issue a denial or a counter-accusation, but no sound emerged. She simply stared at me, her carefully constructed reality shattering against the cold, hard truth. Behind her, my mother reacted differently. Diana gasped a sharp intake of air that sounded painfully loud against the rhythmic hum of the oxygen concentrator. She stepped back, putting a foot of distance between herself and Sarah. Her perfectly manicured hands fluttered nervously, touching the collar of her expensive wool coat. "What fiancé?" Diana whispered. The word carried a brittle tremor, lacking all of its previous commanding authority. She turned her head slowly, shifting her gaze from me to the woman standing beside her. "Sarah, what is she talking about?" Sarah recovered her voice, but the pitch was high and strained. "She is lying, Diana. Do not listen to her. She is just trying to create chaos to delay the paperwork. She is making things up to steal the business assets for herself." I reached into the front compartment of my leather briefcase. I pulled out the thick stack of printed forensic audits. The pages were bound by a heavy black binder clip. I stepped forward and dropped the entire stack directly onto the crisp white hospital blanket covering Mateo's legs. The paper hit the fabric with a dull, heavy thud. "I did not make things up," I replied. "I ran the numbers." I looked directly at my mother, locking onto her wide, fearful eyes. "Pick it up, Mom. Read the data." Page 4 details a $12,000 wire transfer executed 30 days ago. The funds were routed directly from Mateo's primary commercial operating account to an exclusive luxury bridal boutique located in the Gold Coast neighborhood of Chicago. Diana hesitated, her eyes darting between the thick stack of paper and Sarah's pale face. She reached out with a trembling hand and picked up the audit report. She flipped the cover page, searching for the specified transaction line. "Look at her left hand, Mom," I continued, my voice steady and relentless. "Look at the princess-cut diamond ring she has been flashing around the lobby all morning. She purchased that stone using the stolen capital from your son's ruined logistics firm. She has been engaged to another man for weeks while Mateo was dying a few miles away. She utilized the corporate funds to finance her upcoming wedding and secure her new life in Illinois." Diana stared at the printed ledger, her eyes scanning the columns of black numbers. Her breathing grew shallow. A slow, horrifying realization dawned across her features. She looked up slowly, turning her head to stare at Sarah's left hand. The diamond caught the light again, serving as an undeniable physical confession. Sarah took a step back, pulling her hand toward her chest as if she had been burned. "Diana," she stammered, attempting to salvage the crumbling alliance. "I can explain the ring. It is an investment piece, a secure liquid asset to protect the capital from the probate courts. It is part of the plan we discussed. I cut off the lie before it could take root." "Flip to page 6, Mom," I commanded. Diana obeyed, her hands shaking so badly the paper rattled against the binder clip. She found the designated page. "The 30% cut she promised you for helping her secure the estate," I said, detailing the final betrayal. "The percentage you believed would guarantee your retirement stability. The audit tracks the routing numbers. Sarah established a new limited liability company with your name listed as a minority shareholder, but the actual cash reserves were never intended to remain domestic. The ledger shows the pending transfer protocols. The moment the Ohio bank approved the commercial debt transfer or the insurance company released the $1 million death benefit, Sarah programmed the funds to route directly into a Cayman offshore account solely under her control. I let the magnitude of the theft settle over the room for a long, silent beat. "She drained your platinum credit card yesterday morning at the airport," I added, delivering the final blow. It was not a random security hold or a computer glitch. She bled your available credit limit down to 0 to cover her daily operational expenses while she finalized her escape plan. She was going to catch a flight to Chicago tomorrow, leaving you standing here holding an empty shell company, a stack of maxed-out credit cards, and the legal liability for a massive federal wire fraud conspiracy. The alliance between my mother and my sister-in-law imploded instantly. The toxic bond forged by mutual greed shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces right in front of my eyes. Diana dropped the audit report back onto the bed as if the paper itself were toxic. She turned fully toward Sarah, her face contorted with a visceral, primal fury. The carefully maintained facade of the sophisticated matriarch vanished. "You stole from me," she screamed, stepping into Sarah's personal space. "You drained my accounts to buy a wedding dress for another man while my son is suffocating in this bed. You promised me security. You swore we were protecting the family assets." Sarah did not retreat. She did not offer an apology or a tearful confession. The exposure of her true nature stripped away the last remaining layers of her performative grief. She squared her shoulders and met my mother's fury with a look of profound, sneering contempt. "Protecting the family assets." Sarah spat the words, carrying a sharp, toxic edge. "There are no family assets, Diana. Mateo ran his stupid freight business straight into the ground years ago. He was a failure. He dragged me down with him, drowning us in commercial debt and bad hauling leases. I spent 5 years dealing with his incompetence. I am simply extracting the compensation I am owed for wasting my youth on your ruined son." She snatched her designer purse off the vinyl visitor chair, gripping the leather strap tight. "You are both pathetic," she sneered, looking between me and my mother. "You sit around playing the martyr, expecting everyone else to clean up the messes. Well, I am done cleaning." She turned on her heel, her designer boots clicking sharply against the linoleum. She marched toward the open door, intending to abandon the hospital room and flee the collapsing situation. But a new layer of conflict erupted, blocking her escape path. The loud argument had not gone unnoticed by the nursing staff. As Sarah reached the doorway, the head nurse stepped into the frame, blocking the exit entirely. She was flanked by 2 large facility security guards wearing dark blue uniforms and stern professional expressions. The situation shifted rapidly from a private family dispute to an institutional intervention. Sarah was trapped inside the room with the very people she'd just betrayed. Sarah gripped the leather strap of her designer purse tight, her knuckles turning white. She intended to march out of the hospice room, cross the lobby, and vanish into the freezing Minnesota morning before the federal investigators fully mobilized. She had already executed a mental pivot, abandoning the $1 million insurance payout and calculating how far the $12,000 bridal boutique deposit and the cash skimmed from my mother's credit cards could carry her. But her escape route evaporated the moment she reached the heavy oak door. The head nurse stood squarely in the center of the doorway. She was a woman in her late 50s with tired eyes and a posture built from decades of managing chaotic emotional crises on the palliative care ward. She wore standard blue scrubs and carried a digital tablet tucked under her arm. She did not look intimidated by Sarah's aggressive forward momentum. Flanking the nurse were 2 facility security guards. They wore dark navy uniforms, complete with heavy-duty utility belts and professional, unsmiling expressions. They possessed the solid, immovable physical presence of men who routinely escorted combative family members out of medical facilities. They stepped up, forming a human wall across the threshold. "The shouting is entirely unacceptable," the head nurse said, her voice flat and carrying the absolute authority of a medical professional operating within her own domain. "You are severely violating the noise protocols for a palliative care environment. We have other patients on this floor attempting to rest." Diana retreated a few steps, her previous fury instantly replaced by a deep, paralyzing mortification. The exposure of her financial ruin was one thing, but a public reprimand from a hospital administrator shattered her carefully constructed social facade. She shrank back against the wall, avoiding eye contact with the guards. Sarah, however, refused to retreat. She operated on pure predatory instinct, and she believed aggression was her strongest remaining tactic. She puffed out her chest, attempting to physically intimidate the smaller nurse. "Get out of my way," Sarah demanded, raising her right hand and pointing a manicured finger directly at the nurse's chest. The diamond engagement ring flashed uselessly against the sterile hallway lighting. "I am leaving this facility. You have no legal right to detain me." "We are not detaining you," the nurse replied smoothly, stepping aside just enough to clear a narrow path to the hallway. "You are free to exit the building immediately. However, you are not permitted to return. We are initiating a rapid transfer protocol for the patient. We are moving him to a restricted access secure wing due to the ongoing hostile domestic disturbance in this room." The nurse raised her digital tablet, tapping the screen with a stylus. Once the transfer is complete, only the primary emergency contact designated on his official admission file will be permitted past the security checkpoint. Everyone else must vacate the premises. Sarah let out a sharp, derisive laugh, her arrogance overriding her tactical calculation. She stood her ground, crossing her arms over her chest. "That is fine by me. Move him wherever you want. I am his legal spouse. I am his wife. I am the primary contact by default. You cannot keep me out of any wing in this hospital. I will sue this entire facility for emotional distress the moment I speak to my attorney." The head nurse did not flinch. She did not argue the legal definition of marital rights. She simply looked down at the glowing screen of her digital tablet, adjusting her reading glasses. "Actually, ma'am, you are not the designated contact," the nurse said, her voice cool and perfectly steady. "According to the updated legal directives submitted directly to the hospital administration office 3 weeks ago, you lack any authorization regarding this patient." Sarah froze. The aggressive posture dissolved, replaced by a sudden, rigid stillness. "What are you talking about?" she snapped. "I filled out the admission paperwork myself when the ambulance brought him here. I am the sole proxy." The nurse tapped the screen again, pulling up the relevant electronic file. "You did fill out the initial admission forms. However, the patient independently requested a consultation with the hospital's social worker and the staff legal advocate 3 weeks ago, while he was still entirely lucid and capable of executing legal documents. He officially revoked your status." The nurse looked up, meeting Sarah's furious gaze over the rim of her glasses. "He completely removed you from the access list. He explicitly revoked your medical power of attorney and stripped you of all financial proxy authorizations concerning his medical care." The words echoed in the quiet room, landing with devastating precision. The entire foundation of Sarah's confidence, her belief that she controlled Mateo's fate by default of marriage, disintegrated in 3 sentences. "Who did he list?" Sarah demanded, her voice dropping to a harsh, desperate whisper. "Who controls the file?" The nurse shifted her gaze across the room, looking directly at me. "He listed his biological sister, Chloe Garcia, as his sole medical and financial proxy. She is the only individual authorized to remain on the premises during his final transition. The rest of you need to leave the hospital immediately. The security team will escort you to the lobby to ensure a peaceful departure." The revelation hit me like a physical blow striking the center of my chest. I stopped breathing for a long, silent second. The chaotic noise of the room, the glaring security guards, and the furious sister-in-law faded into the background. I turned slowly, looking down at the hospital bed. Mateo lay incredibly still beneath the thin, white blanket. The rhythmic hiss of the oxygen concentrator marked his shallow breaths. But he was not entirely unconscious. His eyelids fluttered and slowly opened just a fraction. His dark eyes, lacking their usual sharp focus, found my face. He looked at me through the fog of the heavy sedation. I stepped closer to the bed, resting my hand gently on the mattress near his hip. Mateo's right hand moved. The motion was incredibly weak, a sluggish, deliberate slide across the cotton sheet. His frail fingers found my palm. He pressed his index and middle fingers against my skin, tapping twice in rapid succession. Tap, tap. It was a small, almost imperceptible movement, but the meaning hit me with the force of a freight train. It was our childhood code. When we played poker at the kitchen table years ago, a double tap on the table meant the hand was safe to fold without losing the pot. It meant the threat was neutralized. Tears pricked the corners of my eyes, blurring my vision. Mateo had not been a passive victim in his own destruction. He possessed the exact same analytical mind he taught me to utilize. He watched Sarah's hands while his body failed him. He recognized the micro-expressions of greed and the nervous, frantic energy she brought into his hospital room. He knew exactly what she was capable of orchestrating long before the forged documents ever materialized. He knew she was draining the corporate accounts. He suspected she was targeting the $1 million life insurance policy intended for his children. He knew he lacked the physical strength to fight her directly. So he quietly, systematically utilized the hospital bureaucracy to strip her of her legal power. He built a silent, invisible fortress around his medical care and placed me at the gate, holding the only key. He put me in charge because he trusted me to protect his legacy when he no longer possessed the capacity to run the math himself. I looked down at his frail hand resting against mine. I squeezed his fingers gently, offering a silent promise. "I got it, Mateo. The pot is secure." The emotional quiet of the moment shattered as the physical reality of the eviction commenced. The two large security guards stepped forward, executing their orders with practiced efficiency. One guard placed a heavy, authoritative hand on Sarah's elbow, guiding her forcefully toward the hallway. "Do not touch me," Sarah screamed, her voice reaching a hysterical pitch. She twisted violently, attempting to shake off his grip, but the guard held firm, maneuvering her through the door frame. "You have no right to do this. I will destroy this entire family. I will take everything." Her threats echoed down the long linoleum corridor, growing fainter as the guards marched her toward the freight elevators. Diana followed silently, her head bowed in profound shame, avoiding eye contact with the nurses and the passing orderlies. She walked out of the room an utterly broken woman, stripped of her pride, her financial security, and the son she failed to protect. The heavy oak door swung shut behind them, blocking out the noise. The room settled back into a deep, sterile quiet. I stood alone by the bed, holding my brother's hand. The immediate physical threat was neutralized, but the tactical execution was far from complete. I possessed the legal proxy, the digital metadata, and the mobile notary receipt. Now I faced a grueling 24-hour race against the federal bureaucracy to ensure the life insurance trap snapped shut perfectly. The room plunged into a profound silence the following morning at exactly 6 o'clock. The rhythmic hiss of the oxygen concentrator ceased, followed immediately by the long, high-pitched, continuous tone of the cardiac monitor. The sound sliced through the sterile quiet of the secure wing. Mateo passed away peacefully as the harsh Minnesota winter sun began to bleach the dark sky gray outside his hospital window. I did not scream or collapse onto the floor. I sat in the vinyl visitor chair holding his hand, allowing the warmth to slowly seep out of his skin. I shed my tears quietly, mourning the older brother who taught me how to read the odds at our childhood kitchen table. He trusted me enough to handle the complex mathematics of his ruin when he no longer possessed the capacity to run the numbers himself. I owed him the dignity of a calm, measured response. A team of nurses entered the room, moving with practiced, respectful efficiency. They verified the time of death, disconnected the intravenous lines, and draped a fresh white sheet over his body. The attending physician, a tired-looking man with kind eyes, offered a brief expression of sympathy before noting the final details on his digital chart. I thanked the medical staff and stepped out into the quiet corridor. The emotional weight of the loss pressed heavily against my chest, but the sharp, calculating mind of the risk analyst refused to shut down. Grief provides no immunity against a determined grifter. The moment Mateo's heart stopped beating, a new, highly accelerated timeline initiated. The clock was ticking, and Sarah possessed a distinct geographic advantage. While I secured the digital freeze on the corporate life insurance policy yesterday, a bureaucratic loophole remained. Sarah operated under the assumption that the $1 million payout was a guaranteed, automated process. But the insurance underwriters required a certified physical copy of the official death certificate before they would release a 7-figure sum to any beneficiary, regardless of the digital authorizations. As the surviving spouse listed on the original corporate charter, Sarah retained the legal right to request the primary death certificate directly from the hospital administration office. If she obtained that document, she could utilize it to aggressively pressure the insurance broker, bypassing the standard fraud investigation delays by threatening a civil lawsuit for withholding a legitimate death benefit. She needed that piece of paper to validate the forgery and force the payout into her offshore shell company. I walked down the long hallway, away from the secure wing, and pushed through the heavy double doors leading to the main hospital cafeteria. The room was mostly empty, smelling of burnt coffee and harsh chemical cleaners. I claimed a small laminate table in the far corner, positioned my back against the painted cinder block wall, and opened my secure work laptop. I needed to construct a legal cage so dense and perfectly aligned that no corporate lawyer or aggressive sister-in-law could pry it open. I spent the next 3 hours drinking bitter black coffee and assembling the final forensic dossier. The raw data required a cohesive narrative structure to ensure rapid action from the federal authorities. I started with the foundation. I drafted a formal legal affidavit asserting my status as the sole authorized medical and financial proxy, verified by the hospital's own electronic records. Next, I integrated the primary evidence of the forgery. I attached the digital metadata extraction report. I highlighted the specific EXIF data proving the change of beneficiary PDF originated from an IP address located at a luxury bridal boutique in Chicago, Illinois. I juxtaposed that digital footprint against the official hospice medical chart, noting the exact time the attending physician declared Matteo comatose and incapable of executing legal documents. The impossible geography of the signature formed a concrete wall of reasonable doubt. Then I added the physical corroboration. I scanned the yellow carbon copy receipt passed to me by Evelyn, the deceased bookkeeper. The document proved Sarah secured the services of a mobile notary 3 full days before she attempted to force my signature onto the medical proxy. The receipt established a clear, premeditated timeline, demonstrating a sophisticated conspiracy rather than a sudden act of panic. Finally, I compiled the financial motive. I attached the corporate ledger audits tracing the diverted funds from Matteo's logistics business directly into Sarah's newly registered Shell Limited Liability Company. I included the $12,000 bridal boutique wire transfer, providing the undeniable context for her presence at the Chicago IP address. The financial flow demonstrated a deliberate, systematic looting of the corporate assets designed to culminate in the $1 million insurance theft. I reviewed the compiled dossier, meticulously checking every date stamp, routing number, and legal citation. The package was airtight. It presented a comprehensive, unassailable narrative of federal wire fraud and identity theft. I drafted a new email attaching the encrypted zip file containing the entire forensic cage. I did not send it to a general customer service inbox. I routed the communication directly to Agent Miller at the Corporate Fraud Investigation Unit, copying the primary legal counsel for the life insurance provider and the lead duty officer at the local FBI field office, specializing in white-collar crime. I hit send. The digital progress bar flashed across the screen, confirming the secure transmission. The trap was officially set, and the federal authorities were holding the trigger. I closed my laptop and packed it into my leather briefcase. I stood up and stretched my legs, feeling the fatigue settling deep into my muscles. The quiet analytical work was finished. The final phase of the operation required direct physical confrontation. I needed to guide the target into the center of the snare and wait for the jaws to snap shut. I left the cafeteria and walked back toward the main lobby of the St. Paul Hospice Center. The large glass windows allowed the harsh morning light to flood the reception area. The space was busier now, filled with arriving medical staff and anxious family members. I took a position near a decorative indoor water feature, ensuring I possessed a clear, unobstructed view of the main entrance doors and the primary administration desk where the death certificates were processed. I leaned against a concrete pillar, adopting a relaxed, unbothered posture. I checked my watch. It was 9:15 in the morning. Sarah would not wait long. She knew Matteo's condition was critical, and she understood the necessity of securing the paperwork before the hospital bureaucracy slowed down for the weekend. She would arrive expecting to steamroll a grieving sister and a tired administrative clerk. She expected to walk out of the building holding a $1 million guarantee. I watched the automatic glass doors slide open and shut, tracking the faces of the people entering the facility. The tension in my chest tightened a slow, steady coil, winding tighter with every passing minute. I possessed the data, the legal authority, and the federal backing, but the confrontation remained unpredictable. Sarah operated without a moral compass, a dangerous variable in any tactical calculation. At exactly 9:45, a sleek, black luxury sedan pulled up to the circular drop-off zone outside the main entrance. The passenger door swung open, and Sarah stepped out into the freezing air. She did not look like a grieving widow arriving to claim her husband's remains. She wore a sharply tailored designer trench coat, dark, oversized sunglasses, and the princess-cut diamond engagement ring flashing prominently on her left hand. She did not arrive alone. A tall man wearing an expensive, custom-tailored suit and carrying a slim leather briefcase exited the vehicle behind her. He projected an aura of aggressive corporate authority. Sarah had brought legal reinforcement to ensure the hospital released the required documents without delay. She strutted through the automatic doors, exuding total confidence. She believed she possessed the winning hand. She believed the $1 million payout was merely a formality away from clearing into her offshore account. She walked straight toward the administration desk, preparing to demand her prize, unaware that the quiet sister holding the leather briefcase near the fountain had already dealt the final, devastating hand. I pushed off the concrete pillar and walked slowly toward the center of the lobby, preparing to spring the trap. The administration desk sat at the center of the lobby, a wide, semicircular counter fronted by thick glass. A young hospital clerk wearing a blue lanyard typed quietly on a computer keyboard. Sarah marched toward the desk, her designer heels clicking a sharp staccato rhythm against the polished terrazzo floor. The lawyer followed a half step behind her, carrying himself with the practiced swagger of a man who billed by the hour and expected immediate compliance. He wore a charcoal pinstripe suit and a silk tie perfectly knotted at his throat. He set a slim leather briefcase onto the high counter. "We are here to collect the official death certificate for Mateo Garcia," the lawyer stated. His tone left no room for pleasantries. "My client is the surviving spouse. We require the certified paperwork to initiate the estate transfer." The clerk typed the name into her keyboard. She frowned, staring at the screen. "I am sorry, sir," she replied. "There is a security block on this patient file. I cannot release any documentation without authorization from the designated medical proxy." Sarah let out a sharp, dramatic sigh. She took off her oversized sunglasses and slapped them onto the counter. "I am his wife," she snapped. "I filled out the admission forms. Whatever block you have in your system is a clerical error. Print the certificate right now. We have a meeting with the insurance broker in an hour." I stepped out from the shadow of the concrete pillar. I walked across the lobby, moving with slow, deliberate purpose. I did not rush. I carried a single, crisp, white business envelope in my right hand. The paper felt light against my skin, but it contained the precise mathematical formula for my sister-in-law's ruin. "Chloe, what are you doing here?" Sarah demanded as I approached the desk. Her voice carried a shrill edge of annoyance. She crossed her arms over her trench coat, attempting to project authority. "I told you to go home. We are handling the hospital administration." I did not look at Sarah. I turned my attention to the man standing next to her. I evaluated his expensive suit and his polished leather shoes. He looked like a corporate litigator, a man accustomed to bullying insurance adjusters and probate clerks. "My name is Chloe Garcia," I said, keeping my voice level and calm. "I am the sole legal proxy for the deceased. I am the only person authorized to release medical records from this facility." The lawyer offered a tight, patronizing smile. He reached into his breast pocket and produced a thick, embossed business card, holding it out to me between his index and middle fingers. "Ms. Garcia," he began, adopting a soothing, placating tone, "I understand you are grieving. This is a difficult morning for everyone. However, my client retains statutory rights as the widow. If you refuse to release the death certificate, we will be forced to file an emergency injunction in family court to compel your cooperation." I did not take his business card. I raised my right hand and extended the crisp, white envelope toward his chest. "I recommend you read the contents of this envelope before you file any motions on behalf of your client," I replied. The lawyer frowned, his patronizing smile faltering. He took the envelope from my hand, weighing it suspiciously. "What is this?" Sarah snapped, stepping closer to peer over his arm. "Stop playing games, Chloe. We do not have time for your amateur legal theories. Tell the clerk to print the paper." I looked directly into Sarah's eyes. "That is a copy of the federal injunction freezing the Key Man corporate life insurance payout," I said, my voice echoing clearly through the quiet lobby. Sarah froze. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her skin looking like dull wax under the bright overhead lights. "Attached to that injunction is the official wire fraud complaint filed with the Federal Bureau of Investigation 30 minutes ago." I continued delivering the facts with the cold rhythm of a metronome. It details your attempt to forge a commercial debt transfer and your unauthorized withdrawals from my mother's credit accounts. Sarah opened her mouth to speak, but her throat seemed to seize. She stared at me, her eyes wide with sudden paralyzing terror. And on the third page, I added delivering the final piece of the forensic trap. You will find the extracted IP metadata report. The EXIF data proves you forged Mateo's signature on the change of beneficiary form yesterday afternoon. It proves the document originated from a retail network connection at a designer bridal shop in Chicago, Illinois, while your husband was lying comatose in a secure wing of this building. The lawyer did not say a word. He pulled the folded documents out of the white envelope. He flipped to the first page. His eyes scanned the header identifying the federal court docket number and the active FBI case file. He flipped to the third page, examining the digital forensic extraction report and the geolocation tags. A corporate attorney understands liability. A lawyer will push ethical boundaries to secure a lucrative settlement, but he will never intentionally tie his own name to an active federal felony investigation. He recognized the undeniable reality of the paperwork in his hands. Sarah had lied to him. She hired him to bully a grieving family member and secure a death certificate to finalize $1 million heist. She almost made him an accessory to wire fraud. The physical transformation of the man was immediate and profound. His shoulders stiffened. He slid the documents back into the white envelope with fast, precise movements. He handed the envelope directly to Sarah, pressing it into her chest so she was forced to take it. He turned around and picked up his slim leather briefcase from the reception counter. He pulled the metal zipper closed. The sharp rasping sound of the zipper echoed in the silent lobby. It was the universal sound of a sinking ship. It was the sound of a professional severing all ties and abandoning the wreckage. "I cannot represent you in this matter," the lawyer said, his voice clipped and entirely devoid of its previous swagger. He did not wait for a response. He did not ask for his retainer fee. He turned on his heel and walked straight toward the automatic glass doors, pushing through them and disappearing into the cold morning air. He left his client behind without a backward glance. Sarah stood alone in the center of the lobby, holding the white envelope in her trembling hands. The crisp paper contained the exact coordinates of her destruction. The arrogant posture, the designer trench coat, and the princess-cut diamond ring offered zero protection against the cold, hard math of the evidence. She looked around the room. The young clerk behind the desk stared at her with wide eyes. A passing orderly paused in the hallway, watching the scene unfold. The audience she usually manipulated with her performative grief now witnessed her total exposure. Sarah looked back at me. Her mouth opened and closed, but she possessed no leverage to negotiate. She held no leverage. She retained no allies. She stood utterly defenseless against the documentation I compiled during the darkest night of my life. The trap I built over 3 grueling hours in the hospital cafeteria snapped shut with perfect mechanical precision. The $1 million payout was locked in a federal vault. The commercial debt remained secured to the failing logistics firm. The offshore shell company sat empty and useless. I did not offer her a parting word of advice. I did not gloat or demand an apology. I turned away from the woman who tried to steal my future. I walked toward the elevators to begin the process of honoring my brother's final wishes, leaving the grifter to face the consequences of her own failed calculations. The conclusion of a financial crime rarely looks like a dramatic television finale. There are no high-speed car chases or tearful courtroom confessions. The fallout arrives quietly, entirely rooted in the slow, grinding machinery of federal paperwork. It took the authorities exactly 3 weeks to compile the forensic evidence I provided. The digital metadata extraction report, the yellow carbon copy receipt from the mobile notary, and the recorded timeline of the hospice medical chart formed an unassailable foundation. A federal grand jury indicted Sarah on 6 counts of wire fraud, criminal conspiracy, and identity theft. Agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation arrested her early on a Tuesday morning outside her leased townhouse. The consequences cascaded with brutal efficiency. The moment the federal injunction locked the corporate accounts, her carefully constructed exit strategy evaporated. The offshore shell limited liability company she registered under my mother's name remained completely empty, devoid of the promised stolen capital. Her secret fiancé, the man she planned to marry in Chicago, reacted exactly how a parasite responds to a dying host. When the federal freeze hit Sarah's personal bank accounts, preventing her from completing the final payment on her custom bridal gown, the fiancé vanished. He did not hire a defense attorney to protect her. He packed his belongings, broke the lease on the luxury condominium they planned to share, and severed all contact. He abandoned her the instant the money stopped flowing. The Key Man corporate life insurance policy, the $1 million asset Sarah risked everything to steal, was thoroughly investigated by the underwriting division. The forged change of beneficiary form was officially invalidated. The insurance provider routed the entire 7-figure death benefit directly back into the original irrevocable trust Mateo established years ago. The financial future of my nieces and nephews was permanently secured, locked behind a fiduciary wall no greedy relative could ever breach. My mother experienced a different kind of ruin. Diana avoided a federal prison sentence through a plea agreement. The prosecutors recognized she was an unwitting pawn manipulated by a more sophisticated predator. She turned state's evidence, testifying against her daughter-in-law in exchange for immunity from criminal prosecution. But immunity from prison does not provide immunity from the Internal Revenue Service. By signing her name as a minority shareholder on the fraudulent shell company, Diana exposed herself to severe civil liability. The government initiated a comprehensive audit of her personal finances. The resulting tax penalties, civil fines, and legal defense fees completely stripped her of her accumulated retirement savings. The comfortable, secure future she believed she guaranteed by helping Sarah bankrupt my brother was erased by the very paperwork she signed to secure it. 1 month after the funeral, my cell phone rang while I was sitting at my desk reviewing a quarterly risk assessment for my firm. The caller ID displayed my mother's number. I had not spoken to Diana since she walked out of the palliative care ward in shame. I answered the call. Chloe, my mother sobbed, her voice thin and reedy, echoing with genuine desperation. The performative, commanding tone she utilized in the hospital lobby was gone. She sounded old and incredibly tired. I need your help. The lawyers drained the last of my checking account today to cover the final settlement fees. I am 2 weeks behind on my rent. They are threatening eviction. I need a loan, Chloe. Just enough to bridge the gap until I can figure out what to do. You have the savings. You can afford it. She fell back into her default behavioral pattern. She expected the quiet, reliable daughter to open her checkbook and absorb the financial shockwave of her terrible decisions. She expected me to prioritize family loyalty over my own stability. I leaned back in my desk chair looking out my office window at the Minneapolis skyline. I did not raise my voice. I did not unleash a tirade of angry recriminations or demand an apology for the way she treated me at the hospice. I am a risk analyst mom, I said, keeping my voice calm and perfectly steady. I calculate the probability of return on invested capital. You engaged in a conspiracy to steal my brother's legacy. You allowed your daughter-in-law to max out your credit cards and establish a fraudulent shell company in your name. You demonstrated a profound inability to manage basic liability. I paused, letting the cold logic of the assessment settle over the phone line. I do not fund failing enterprises, I continued, and you are a bad investment. I disconnected the call. I opened the contact settings on my phone and permanently blocked her number. I severed the final toxic tie to a family structure built entirely on exploitation. The most profound element of the resolution, however, arrived through the court-mandated restitution orders. Sarah pleaded guilty to reduced charges to avoid a lengthy trial. The judge sentenced her to 5 years of supervised federal probation, a massive financial penalty, and a mandatory community service requirement. Stripped of the stolen corporate funds and abandoned by her fiancé, she possessed no resources to pay her legal debts. The court ordered her to secure immediate full-time employment and garnish 70% of her wages to satisfy the restitution schedule. With a fresh federal felony conviction on her public record, no financial institution or corporate logistics firm would hire her. Her options were severely limited. She eventually secured a minimum wage position at a low-income regional medical clinic. The poetic justice of her placement was staggering. Sarah, the woman who utilized a diamond engagement ring as a weapon of intimidation, was forced to sit behind a scuffed laminate counter, answering ringing telephones and filing endless stacks of medical charts. She spent 8 hours a day managing patient intake forms and coordinating health insurance verification. It was the exact same administrative receptionist job she fired Evelyn from 2 years prior. Sarah destroyed a loyal employee to steal a pension fund. Now she occupied the identical desk, forced to labor in the same administrative trenches to repay the debt she accumulated trying to steal $1 million. I spent the next 6 months managing Mateo's estate. As his designated proxy, I utilized my professional skills to untangle the mess he left behind. I contacted the legitimate commercial vendors, the hauling companies, and the fuel suppliers who filed civil suits against his failing logistics firm. I negotiated fair settlements, paying off the outstanding balances using the remaining liquid assets from the business. I cleared his name. I ensured his corporate legacy concluded with honor rather than bankruptcy. The chaos my family tried to bury me in the complex web of forged debt transfers, offshore accounts, and digital theft was entirely dismantled. They believed my meticulous nature made me a convenient target. They mocked my career, assuming my reliance on data made me weak. But the exact skills they mocked, the ability to read a ledger, track a routing number, and calculate a risk profile, provided the precise tools required to destroy their conspiracy and secure the final victory. 6 months have passed since the morning the federal authorities dismantled the conspiracy inside the hospice lobby. The harsh Minnesota winter finally broke, yielding to a slow, hesitant spring. The thick layers of dirty ice clogging the street gutters melted away, rushing into the storm drains and washing the pavement clean. My daily routine returned to a predictable, steady rhythm. I wake up early, brew a pot of black coffee, and review the overnight global market reports before heading to my corporate office downtown. My life is quiet now. It is a deliberate, intentional quiet. I no longer flinch when my cell phone rings, and I no longer spend my weekends auditing the financial disasters of my relatives. My regular commute weaves through the surface streets of St. Paul. The route provides a brief window of transition between the solitude of my home and the high-stakes environment of the risk analysis firm. On certain mornings, the heavy commuter traffic forces me to stop at a long red light located directly across the street from the palliative care center. The building looks entirely ordinary from the outside. It features a generic brick facade and a wide paved parking lot. But the sensory memories anchored to that specific geographic coordinate remain incredibly sharp. I roll my car window down a fraction. I can still detect the faint trace of industrial lavender bleeding out from the facility exhaust vents, mixing with the cold morning air and the smell of vehicle exhaust. I look up past the main entrance to the second floor. My eyes find the specific rectangular window that used to belong to Evelyn Hayes. Evelyn was a professional bookkeeper. She spent her entire adult life balancing corporate ledgers, verifying routing numbers, and ensuring the math aligned perfectly at the end of every fiscal quarter. When her health failed and her employer callously discarded her, she ended up in a sterile room waiting for the end. She owed me nothing. We shared zero genetic material and possessed no shared history. We traded a few blueberry muffins and polite nods across a quiet corridor. Yet Evelyn utilized her final conscious moments on this earth to slip a yellow carbon copy receipt into the hands of a night nurse. She spent her dying breaths warning me about the predators lurking inside my own bloodline. She executed one final masterclass in accounting. She balanced the moral ledger of my family. She provided the single, undeniable piece of evidence required to tilt the entire balance of power. I owe my current financial freedom and my ongoing peace of mind to a discarded stranger who refused to let a grifter win. I shift my gaze from her window down to the corner of the parking lot, remembering the last time I walked out of those automatic glass doors. The lobby was quiet that morning. The corporate lawyer had severed his retainer and fled the building. Sarah stood frozen by the administration desk, stripped of her leverage and her arrogant posture. I did not look back at her. I walked through the sliding doors and stepped into the freezing air. I carried my leather tote bag over my shoulder. It felt heavy, knocking against my hip with every step. I navigated across the icy asphalt, stopping near the far edge of the property, where the facility maintained a row of large green industrial trash bins. I set my briefcase on the ground. I reached deep into the tote bag and pulled out the heavy oak clipboard my mother had shoved across Mateo's rolling tray table the previous day. I held the object in both hands. The rusted metal clasp bit into my thumb. The wood was scarred and worn, carrying the grime of countless medical wards. For over a decade, that clipboard, or variations of it, represented the suffocating burden of my family dynamic. It was the physical embodiment of the unwritten contract demanding I fix the bankruptcies, cover the missed rent payments, and absorb the collateral damage of their reckless choices. They framed my compliance as a familial duty. They called it keeping the peace. But the peace only existed because I continuously funded the war effort. I served as the designated safety net, expected to catch them every time they intentionally jumped off a financial cliff. I held the wood over the edge of the green metal bin. I let my fingers open. The clipboard fell. It struck the bottom of the empty steel container with a loud, hollow thud. The sound echoed sharply in the cold air. A profound physical lightness washed over my shoulders the moment the wood left my hands. The invisible tether connecting me to their chaos snapped. I picked up my briefcase, walked to my vehicle, started the engine, and drove away, leaving the wreckage entirely behind me. If you are listening to this broadcast today, I want to speak directly to you. You know exactly who you are. You are the quiet one in the family photograph. You are the reliable sibling. You are the person who handles the complex spreadsheets, the logistical details, and the legal paperwork, while the rest of your relatives handle the theater and the drama. You sit in the background carrying the zero debt-to-income ratio, maintaining the pristine credit score, providing the stable foundation they invariably attempt to build their unstable lives upon. They will tell you that family requires constant sacrifice. They will accuse you of being cold or calculating when you finally refuse to write the bailout check or sign the lease guarantee. They will weaponize your stability against you, claiming your success obligates you to fund their failures. Do not let them convince you that your boundaries are cruel. Protecting your own future is not an act of malice. Empathy without strict boundaries is simply self-destruction. Build your fences high and construct them out of solid, verifiable data. Keep your receipts. Digitize your records, retain the metadata, and log the communication timelines. Toxic individuals will always attempt to manipulate your emotions because feelings are subjective and easily distorted. Numbers possess no inherent bias. A forensic audit does not care about a tearful apology or a designer diamond ring. The math reveals the stark, undeniable truth hidden beneath the performative grief. The data is your armor. Sometime in the future, you might find yourself sitting in a quiet room. A relative might slide a piece of paper across a laminate table toward you. They might hand you a specific pen and ask you to verify a document. They will tell you it is just a routine formality. They will insist your signature is required to expedite a process or simply to keep the peace. Do not take the pen. Do not sign the paper. Read the document. Verify the terms. And if the math feels wrong, if an alarm bell rings in the back of your mind, stand up from the table. Walk out of the room. Drive home tonight if you can. The truth will still be there in the morning, waiting for the light, and your financial independence will remain intact. Leave a comment below if a stranger ever stepped in and saved you from the predators inside your own family. Share your story. Tell me about your Evelyn. Let the people listening know they are not standing alone in the hallway. Stay safe out there and always trust the math. We spend our lives building homes, filling them with framed photographs and assigning permanent roles around the holiday dinner table. Within the traditional American family structure, we are taught to believe that shared blood acts as an impenetrable shield against the darker impulses of human nature. We are conditioned to assume that the people who raised us, and the siblings who grew up under the same roof, will inherently protect our best interests. But sitting in that St. Paul palliative care ward, watching my mother demand I sign away my financial security to cover my brother's ruin, I realized how fragile that shield truly is. The collapse of my family was not a sudden, unpredictable explosion. It was the inevitable result of a slow, generational erosion of accountability and a profound failure of parenting. Let us examine how we raise our children in this culture. We frequently speak about the American dream as a pursuit of independent success. But within the walls of our homes, we often harbor a dangerous psychological blind spot. Parents unconsciously categorize their children early in life. There is usually a favored child, the one whose charm, vulnerability, or constant missteps demand endless rescue and attention. And then there is the reliable child, the one who balances their checkbook, completes their homework without being asked, and learns at a very young age to absorb the shockwaves of the household. My mother, Diana, did what so many parents do out of a misguided, desperate sense of love. She penalized my competence to subsidize my brother's chaos. When parents demand that their responsible children serve as permanent safety nets for their reckless siblings, they are not teaching family unity. They are teaching exploitation. They are demonstrating that good behavior yields punishment, while bad behavior yields infinite grace. A parent's fundamental job is to guide a child toward a self-sustaining adulthood anchored by honesty and fairness. Diana failed both of her children in this regard. She robbed Mateo of the vital friction required to mature, and she robbed me of a mother who saw me as an individual rather than a convenient insurance policy. True family responsibility requires profound emotional awareness. It demands a willingness to look at the people we love and see them exactly as they are, rather than the idealized versions we wish them to be. Sarah, my brother's wife, did not infiltrate our family by force or brilliant deception. She simply walked through doors that had been left wide open by decades of polite, swept-under-the-rug enabling. In many traditional families, we ignore the small lies to maintain an artificial peace. We cover the bounce checks. We smile through the uncomfortable holiday gatherings, refusing to call out the obvious deceit sitting across the table. But silence is not peace. Silence, practiced over years, is simply a deferred payment on a much larger betrayal. By refusing to hold Mateo accountable for his early business failures, my mother created an environment where a predator like Sarah could thrive. Sarah recognized a family system that prioritized the illusion of harmony over the cold, hard truth, and she exploited that weakness with devastating efficiency. If we want to raise children who understand the value of integrity, we have to model it, especially when it hurts. We have to enforce boundaries. Fairness in a parenting dynamic does not mean the equal distribution of financial bailouts. Fairness means an equal expectation of accountability. It means teaching a child that their actions carry weight and that they cannot offload the consequences of their choices onto the shoulders of the people who love them. In his final days, Mateo finally understood this distinction. His last act on this earth was not a desperate plea for another unearned rescue. By secretly changing his medical and financial proxy, stripping his predatory wife of her legal power, and trusting me to protect the life insurance policy meant for his children, he finally acted as a father should. He utilized the last of his fading strength to ensure his kids would not inherit his ruin. He broke the generational cycle of enabling. It was a brutal, heartbreaking way to learn a lesson about legacy and responsibility, but his final choice secured a future for the next generation. He protected his children by embracing the truth he had avoided his entire life. These are the hard, quiet truths we often avoid until it is too late. We look away from the red flags because acknowledging them requires dismantling the comfortable illusions we hold about the people we share a last name with. But facing the reality of your family dynamic is the only way to protect your own future. If you are navigating the complex, sometimes painful realities of family boundaries, you are not walking this path alone. Join our community of listeners who refuse to look away from the truth. Subscribe and follow the Revenge Order channel today. We share these stories not just to expose the darkness, but to help you find the courage to draw your own lines in the sand. Think about your own family tree tonight. Think about the specific roles assigned to you before you were even old enough to speak. Are you the one holding the heavy wooden clipboard demanding compliance? Or are you the one expected to silently sign the paper to keep the peace? Sometimes the most profound act of love and guidance you can offer your family is the word no. I threw my mother's clipboard into an industrial trash bin months ago, but the hollow echo of it hitting the bottom still resonates in my mind. We all carry invisible clipboards, handed to us by our parents, weighted down with unspoken expectations and inherited debts. The vital question is, how long will you carry yours before you realize you possess the power to put it down? Look across your living room. Look at the people sitting with you, sharing your space and your time. Who are they really? When the money runs out, the leverage disappears, and the room goes completely quiet. You might know the answer immediately, or you might spend the rest of your life hoping you never have to find out.